Good afternoon, everybody. Thank you very much for joining our webinar this afternoon. I'm just going to leave it a minute or two just while people join, as we've got about 25 people have registered. So just bear with us a minute or two, and then I'll just go through some housekeeping before passing over to the team to deliver the webinar. Okay, since it's a couple of minutes past 4, let's get going. So, hello everyone. My name is Billy. I'm the GA Stakeholder Manager at the CAA, and we've scheduled this webinar today to talk you through some UK flight crew licensing changes that are incoming. So, my colleagues Ed Bellamy and Justin Wilcox will be going through a presentation with you. There'll be plenty of chances for questions throughout and at the end. For those questions, please use the chat function. You can use that throughout the session. There'll be some opportunities throughout where we'll pause and look at any questions. Just in terms of some housekeeping, obviously this is a webinar. It's being recorded, and there will be a transcript available afterwards as well, which we can share. And we have until about 5:30. I'm not sure whether we'll use the whole time, but we've got plenty of time basically to go through this and answer any questions that you might have. So with that, I will pass over to Ed and Justin, who will take you through some slides on this topic. So over to you, Ed. Thank you.
Thanks, Billy, and good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to this webinar about the recent changes to flight crew licensing in the UK as a result of the GA licensing review. I'm Ed Bellamy. I work in the General Aviation Unit. I'm joined in Gatwick today with Justin Wilcox, who is also in the GA Unit Policy team. So, changes to UK flight crew licensing October this year. I'll start with a bit of background. So, as many of you will probably be aware, there's been a project at the CA for the last few years called the GA Licensing and Training Simplification Project, or the GA Licensing Review sometimes for short, to look at the licensing regulations across all aircraft categories and both the simulated law and the air navigation order. And this arose from a consultation originally in December 2020, CAP 1985, which was essentially opportunities post leaving the ARSA system. And given that we had a kind of split fleet in GA from a regulatory point of view, half regulated by ARSA, half regulated under the ANO still under Annex 1, we wanted to do a wholesale review of the regulations, the Aircrew Regulation, the Balloon Regulation, Sailplane Regulation, and the ANO, to essentially determine what could be made simpler or more proportionate. The focus very much on private licenses and non-commercial operations. Well, that wasn't always quite a strict boundary. There were areas where we've kind of delved into the commercial side a little bit more as well, particularly on the ballooning side of things. And we went through quite a long policy process. So we started in earnest towards the end of 2021, and there were a number of consultations. You might remember one in 2022 was a relatively high-level one, just looking thematically at what the changes we wanted to make. And the theme of that really was consolidation between the simulated regulations, the former European regulations, and the air navigation order that had historically contained the UK's national licensing regulations. Now, at this point, there was an aspiration or a hope, I think, that we might have had an actual legal consolidation between the two frameworks by this point in 2025. Unfortunately, that hasn't actually happened, but we've done our best to remove these misalignments and between the two systems and ensure that the system can be as optimized as it can be within the current legal framework. So we had that thematic consultation in 2022. The feedback on that was pretty good. The general direction of travel was supported. And then in 2024, we had a more detailed consultation that actually set out what changes to which regulations and what aircraft categories would look like. Feedback from that was also generally good, so we continued down the path of simpler, lighter, better. And earlier this year, the final sort of piece of the puzzle was the AMC, the Acceptable Means of Compliance and Guidance Material consultation, which is kind of putting the meat on the bones as far as the simulated implementing rules, particularly Aircrew Regulation, are concerned in terms of how stakeholders will actually comply with these new regulations in the field when you're training, applying for licenses and so forth. So that's kind of the journey up until now. Appreciate you're probably more interested in what's actually changing, what do you have to be aware of as training organisations, as instructors, examiners, etc. We'll go on to that in a minute. But if you do want any further information, ca.co.uk/GA, and there's a page there, Licensing and Training Simplification, which will give more detail, and we'll be updating that page over the coming weeks as we approach the 1st of October. So moving on to that detail, the first area I'll cover is the fixed wing PPL issued under Part FCL. So the key changes there. So we're aligning with the ICAO Annex 1 minimum of 40 hours of flight time as pilot of aeroplanes. Now, the expectation is not here that people are suddenly going to be doing their PPL in 40 hours. The national average is probably something like 55 hours at the moment, and we're not really anticipating that will change. But it was a kind of general principle of the project that where ICAO sets a minimum, we don't go beyond that unless we think there's a really good safety case to do so. The other effect of lowering it to 40 hours and also changing it from flight instruction to flight time as pilot of aeroplanes is it makes the crediting of previous flight experience a bit more straightforward for those who, for example, are coming from 3-axis microlights. And we'll go on to a little bit more detail about that in a minute. So in terms of how that more flexible crediting is now deployed, there's quite a lot of new AMC and GM, which is on the next slide, that will guide training organisations as to how that is applied in practice. So, but the essential principle is that training organisations must assess an applicant's previous experience and what level of skill they're at, what areas of the PPL syllabus they might not previously have covered. Generally, a lot more previous flight time in microlight aeroplanes can now be credited, except for the 10 hours supervised solo and also the qualifying cross-country requirement that's in Annex 1 and Part FCL will always also have to be done on a non-microlight aeroplane. Obviously, they still have to pass the PPL exams and the skill test. But another thing we've put in is for people who are coming from the PPLA, the NPPLA, I should say, with a microlight class rating, they now won't have to do the entire set of PPL, Part FCL PPL exams. They may do a reduced bridging suite of 4 papers such that they're not having to repeat any TK they would have done at microlight class rating level. There will also be an option for a 35-hour PPL course for ATOs only, and it is a specific approval, so it's something that an ATO will have to submit an application for, have to put together a 35-hour, essentially a competency-based PPL course with a minimum completion time of 35 hours, and they'll have to put that into their inspector and demonstrate how they would deliver that PPL syllabus in a minimum of 35 hours. Also adding moving maps and training in partial power loss to the PPLA syllabus, and more guidance will be included on that in the relevant AMC GM to the PPL course. So that's the overview. of the fixed wing PPL and the kind of broad areas of change. On the next slide, you'll see some links there as to where you actually find the detail of the change of the regulation. So the change to the implementing rule actually within Part FCL for the PPL qualifying experience is FCL 210A, experience requirements and crediting. Now, those links in the slide there should work for the attendees. So if you want to click on them and have a look at them, that should take you to the relevant entry in the CA's aviation regulatory library. And so, for example, FCL 210A, you'll see there is some text there that's in magenta, and that is essentially the new text that's coming into force on the 1st of October. Now, I mentioned the crediting earlier on. A lot more AMC GM has been added to FCL 210A to guide ATOs and DTOs in terms of how that crediting might be applied in practice. So if, for example, we want to look at AMC 1 to FCL 210A, that sets out a number of different scenarios. So, for example, an applicant with no previous experience, i.e. a normal sort of ab initio PPL applicant, that's fairly straightforward and not really any change in that regard. The main kind of implication of the change is for those who do have some previous fixed wing time. So the examples you'll see in AMC 1 include previous aeroplane time, previous TMG time, touring motor glider time, and various previous Microlight aeroplane time. And for example, with someone who has largely got previous Microlight aeroplane time, there's a little bit more detail in that AMC around what exercises to look out for, ones that they might not have covered at NPPL Microlight level. So have a look at those. Put any questions in the chat that you might have, and we'll come to those in due course. The other thing we'll be doing is updating the PPL course completion certificate. So obviously, as a result of making the crediting arrangements a little bit more straightforward, the PPL course completion certificate will be updated to reflect that. I mentioned before the NPPL-A to PPL-A bridging TK exams. So these are primarily aimed at people who've done an NPPL-A on their on microlights and are coming from microlight class rating. Those 4 papers that I mentioned before will cover air law and ops procedures, as you might expect, aircraft general knowledge, flight performance, planning, navigation, and principles of flight. So, and very much an emphasis on the stuff that will be new for someone who is coming from the microlight world. Another update to the practical syllabus, though, that we'll be going in is training in partial power loss scenarios. So we, as CA, received a AAIB recommendation a number of years ago after a series of accidents in which a aircraft had experienced partial loss of power, and the outcome had not been as good as it might have been if perhaps they just shut the throttle and landed straight ahead. So we want to address this as part of the basic training. We'll also be going into the biannual refresher training and also in due course to the SEP proficiency check in Appendix 9 to Part FCL, so that it's covered in all bases in that regard. So you'll see some additional text to exercises 12 and 13 regarding partial power failures, and also exercise 16, the PFL training. Exercise 6 should also be used to demonstrate flight at different power settings. That's a good opportunity to introduce the concept of, or the notion of, what power setting the aircraft will, for example, maintain level flight at a safe speed, and at what point it won't. So new AMC GM on that subject, and then in terms of the skill test, partial power failure will now be a discretionary item under Section 5D of the licence skill test. And the examiner handbook will be given a minor update in that regard to reflect that. So Astral Aviation, our safety promotion partner, will be doing an online seminar on teaching partial power loss, very much aimed at instructors and examiners, on the 10th of September. So that's next week at 19:30 local time. So if you're free then, please do sign up and watch that webinar, and there'll be an opportunity to have lots of questions and discussions with our Astral partners. Links there to sign up via Astral. And also the other piece of guidance that we refer to quite a lot is this Australian document that was produced by the Australian Transport Safety Bureau on managing partial power loss after takeoff in single-engined aircraft. So it's one particular area that we want to really improve outcomes in GA accidents further to the LAPL recommendation. The other new thing that you'll see in the PPL A and also the H, this also includes helicopters as well, is reference to VFR Moving Map devices for both the biennial refresher training and also the license skill test. So this is not going in as a mandatory item, but in the PPL A, for example, exercise is 18B through C. There'll now be some additional guidance as to, for example, when to introduce a VFR moving map if you so wish. Starts off with dead reckoning training as conventionally, and then introduces the moving map device at a slightly later point, once the traditional skills have been assimilated, shall we say. Same goes for the PPL H, and navigation in that context is exercise 25A, B, and C. And then in the skill test, similarly, it's added to section 3 navigation as an optional item for both aeroplanes and helicopters. So it's not mandating anyone to actually use a VFR moving map device on their skill test as unless they want to, but if they do, it's now set out there more clearly when they can, and guidance to examiners will be included in the examiner handbook as well as to how to handle that in practice. In the GM, you'll also see a link to our safety sense leaflet on VFR moving map devices. That's been out there for a few years now, and it's probably a good starting point for best practice with using said devices, both for PPL training and generally as GA pilots. So I'll briefly move on to helicopters, PPL H and also the LAPL H, but compared to the fixed wing category, it's fair to say not a huge amount is changing for helicopters. So that we're not changing the equivalent of FCL 210 for helicopters in terms of the qualifying experience or anything like that. So the minimum flight time requirements, dual, solo, etc. for helicopters are not changing. Cosmetic change, though, that you will see in the course, in the PPLH course in AMC 2 to FCL 210, is that we are merging the text of the PPLH and the LAPL H course. So currently you'll see one course under the entry for PPLH FCL 210, and you'll see another entry under the equivalent for LAPL H. This is perhaps a little bit of a duplication and a bit confusing, given that in practice the two courses are very similar. So what we've decided to do is consolidate under PPLH entry, and the small number of exercises that don't feature on the LAPL H will just be annotated, not applicable to the LAPL, not required to the LAPL. So that will go into the reg library and should be visible in the link there that you see to AMC 2 to FCL 210. The other small thing I'll mention is that we are merging the NPPL H with the LAPL H. So this is a bit niche, but the NPPL H was essentially a creation in order to allow LAPL H holders to fly helicopters that were not subject to EASA regulation, so non-EASA helicopters, or what we now call non-Part 21 helicopters, because one thing we can't do is endorse a type rating for a non-Part 21 helicopter onto a Part FCL license. So the NPPLH was kind of invented to get around that. What we've done instead this time is essentially put an equivalent of the LAPL H in the ANO and lined it up in terms of revalidation, such that if you hold a non-Part 21 type rating, it can now effectively be endorsed on a LAPL H, and you can maintain its by the rolling validity in the way that you would as a LAPL H holder. In order for that to happen, the license holder has to have what's called a combined license document, so a document that's issued both under Part FCL and the air navigation order, and that's currently in the final stages of testing. We hope to have that facility out in the coming weeks. It may not be there for the 1st of October, but hopefully shortly thereafter. That's pretty much it for helicopters. I think the combined license facility, though, will be quite helpful in the context of helicopters, because obviously you've got a number of non-Part 21 type ratings, for example, the Gazelle, also the Wasp, for example. So when we do get that service online, pilots will be able to have all their ratings on a single license document that's valid both under the Part FCL and also the ANO. So I will just pause briefly. Billy, do we have any questions?
Haven't had any questions through on the chat just yet. So we can either wait a minute and see if anybody wants to type anything in for questions, or we can carry on and pause again shortly.
Let's motor on, and I'll just get through the sub-ICAO aeroplane piece, and yeah, if you do have any questions, please do fire them into the chat. So we talked about the fixed wing PPL and also the PPL-H, i.e. the ICAO license as issued under Part FCL. I'll move on now to what we call the sub-ICAO license. So that's essentially the National Private Pilot's License and the Light Aircraft Pilot's License. And this slide is all about the aeroplane category. So what I said about the helicopters a moment ago, it's a slightly different story for the aeroplanes. So in the context of the GA licensing review, one of the things we looked at was consolidation and simplification. And as many of you all know, the CAA has issued both the LAPL and the NPPL for some time now in parallel, even though the two licenses have very similar privileges. Obviously, whilst we were in EASA, the NPPL was only valid for non-EASA aircraft, but since EU exit, that's no longer the case. It's valid equally now for Part 21 and non-Part 21 aircraft. So we've decided to stop issuing the LAPL from the 1st of October, and the NPPL will become effectively the single entry-level sub-ICAO license for UK GA. Existing LAPL however, remain valid. There's no requirement to convert to an NPPL or if you, for example, put in for a change of address, you won't get given back an NPPL. Your existing LAPL is, it's valid for life. We're just not issuing any new ones. However, one change that is happening is that there's going to be a period between October this year and next of transitioning the existing LAPL holders over to a fixed validity system for the class ratings on the LAPL. So it'll be similar to the PPL and the NPPL in that regard. And it was a piece of feedback from the various consultations that particularly instructors, examiners would prefer it if all licenses revalidated in the same way, essentially, which makes sense. So simpler, lighter, better, hopefully. Obviously, we have a few people who are probably training as we speak towards the LAPL and who might not be complete their training and skill test prior to the 1st of October. If you are in that situation, if you've got someone who's got 10, 20 hours into a LAPL course, all of that training will still count towards the NPPL. There's no need to change course. There's not really any need to do anything differently, particularly other than there are one or two small differences in the NPPL syllabus, which, if applying for the license after the 1st of October, we do expect to be completed. So, for example, 1 hour instrument appreciation is still on the NPPL syllabus, whereas it's not on the LAPL. Technically, the NPPL has a minimum of 32 hours total time versus the 30 minimum for LAPL, although we don't think that's a distinction that many people will notice in practice, because most people take far longer than that. The qualifying cross-country requirement for the NPPL is also very slightly longer than the LAPL. If someone's already done their LAPL qualifying cross-country, that's fine. If they haven't, however, do comply with the slightly longer NPPL one. Basic privileges of the NPPL though remain the same compared to what they are today. However, we are harmonizing with some of the Part FCL terminology in this area just to make things more straightforward. So on the NPPL, currently you've got SSEA, SLMG, and Microlight class ratings. After the 1st of October, that will become SEP, TMG, and Microlight. Again, no need to change any licenses or convert or anything like that. The ratings will just be legally deemed to be the new terms after the 1st of October. And if for some reason your license is reissued, they'll just be updated with the SEP and TMG terminology respectively. So that's just like an alignment with PyFCL, because PyFCL talks TMGs, for example, rather than SLMGs. We're also going to make some simplifications to the revalidation process for the NPPL-A ratings. So at the moment, if you've got multiple ratings on an NPPL-A, you've got to do at least 1 hour in each aircraft, in each class category, as it were, in order to revalidate. All of them are actually going to take that requirement out. We just think that once someone's got a rating, as long as they're flying in one of the aircraft on the license, that should be able to keep all 3 valid, albeit we do expect people to be sensible in this regard. So if you do have an SLMG rating, it makes sense to do some, or a TMG rating, I should say, it makes sense to do some of that if you want to keep that rating valid. But the basic requirement will just be to meet the revalidation requirements in one of the ratings that you hold. And that kind of mirrors, for example, the PyFCL approach of having an SEP and a TMG simultaneously. You can fly both, and that or either, and that will meet the requirements of both. Another change that we're making is the Microlight exams, or the exams that are currently based on the Microlight syllabus, will be valid now for all the classes at initial issue on the NPPL-A. So if you're training on an SEP for the NPPL-A, you can now, from the 1st of October, technically take the Microlight exams, but you also have the option to take the PyFCL PPL-A exams as you do today. The difference being is if you do then ever upgrade to the full PPL, if you've already taken the PPL exams, you've already ticked that box. We will be publishing in the coming weeks an updated policy and procedures cap for the NPPL-A in terms of the detail of the requirements and the application procedures. It will largely be based on the existing content in CAP 804. So some of you might be familiar with the national licensing requirements in CAP 804. There's quite a lot of material in there that relates to the NPPL-A. So we'll be updating that and republishing it in the coming weeks into a much smaller cap that essentially just focuses on the NPPL-A, and I think we're going to include the IMC rating in that as well. Now, a key point about the NPPL-A with SEP rating is that applications for those are normally handled initially by the Light Aircraft Association. So most NPPL-As for SEPs go to the LAA. The Microlights, if you're doing it on Microlights, that goes to the BMAA. No change in that regard. But for ATOs, DTOs who primarily teach the LAPL at the moment might not be aware that the LAA handle the NPPL-A applications. You can still come direct to the CA. I would recommend that you go through the LAA process. It's a recommendation process. So essentially they review the application, the relevant course completion certificate, and then forward it on to the CA for license issue. That's probably enough on the sub-ICAO piece. Do we have any questions?
We have a kind of question from Pete Stratton in the chat, who has said for the NPPL-A and LAPL-A, so after the change, as an FI and examiner, we will have to report NPPL class rating renewal and revalidation activity to CAA rather than simply endorse the license and move on. Don't know whether that's a statement or whether that's asking for clarification. So yeah,
that's a good question, Pete. I'm not sure we've actually taken a policy decision on that yet. When we do, it will be in the NPPL cap. I think, off the top of my head, I think we probably would prefer to know what, whose ratings are valid, but we'll have a look at that, and that question will be answered when the cap comes out.
That's it for questions at the moment, Ed. So I'd carry on.
Great. Well, at this point, then, I'm going to hand over to Justin, who is going to talk about the update to the revalidation requirements.
Thanks, Ed. Good afternoon to everybody. I'm Justin Wilcox in the GA unit. We're going to touch on the revalidation of class ratings, specifically SEP, TMG, and the Microlight class ratings. As Ed already alluded to, one of the things that the consultations came back with was a desire for there being harmonisation across the revalidation requirements for class ratings. And certainly when I was out and about at ATOs and DTOs doing audits, that came across very clearly from instructors and examiners as well. So what we've done for the revalidation by experience for the SEP and the SSEA, and which will turn into the SEP after the 1st October, and then TMG and SLMG and Microlights, is we've aligned them all to a 12-hour requirement and 6 hours as pilot in command. The key bit is the 6 hours can be separated now across the 24-month validity. So you could do 6 in the first year and 6 in the second. The dual refresher flight with an instructor as well will still be there, and that will be a requirement. As Ed pointed out in the previous slide, one of the previous slides, the LAPL, what we'll be doing with this is over the next 12 months, LAPL holders with the rolling validity will move to a fixed class rating style validity by October 2026. And as we go through next year, what we'll do is we'll do some comms around specifically around that piece for license holders and for instructors and examiners, so they know what the transition will be. As we've already got there are a couple of links, which are crediting of flight time and theoretical knowledge. There's the revalidation of class rating, type ratings, and Schedule 8 to their navigation order. And again, those links, you can click on those, and those will take you to the relevant bits. Got the next one first. So I touched on the refresher training flight. One of the things that CAA would like to do is try and get more benefit from the biannual, the dual refresher flight with an instructor, which is the SEP, TMG, and Microlight class rating pilot needs to do every 2 years. Also, the AIB have raised a number of occasions the fact that we don't seem to be getting the benefit out of this in terms of refreshing existing license holders' knowledge and skills. So again, what we've tried to do is we've tried to update the AMC and the guidance material that's associated with that to put some more information out there, some more help to instructors to structure the dual refresher flight in a way that will start to build a knowledge base. Excuse me. So the first one talks about, the first AMC talks about a briefing. We've got threat and error management there, decision-making skills. We've got navigation, and the first time again for license holders, we're going to start discussing about the use of VFR Moving Maps. We've got recovery from the different stall exercises. In addition, further on, we'll be looking at partial power loss, simulated loss of power, and then also partial power loss at different phases in flight. So that's not just the takeoff scenario, that's maybe in the circuit, maybe en route as well. And so again, there are the different elements will be there. Now, in the guidance material, there is some I would say it's quite high level information to try and help instructors structure those exercises. But the idea, the principal idea here is that what the instructor will do with the pilot is build up a revalidation for them to identify what bits of the flying syllabus they may not have practiced for some time, and therefore then they can build up that program, deliver that as a 1 hour dual refresher flight. And that might even require a little bit of revising certain theoretical knowledge elements as well. And so that might then become a pattern every 2 years that the instructor can do with that. And ideally, yes, it could be the same instructor, it could be another instructor, but there will be a pattern that the instructor and the pilot could build up over a number of revalidations so that they cover more and more of the information that's in the AMC and the GM. It's worth stressing at this point, it isn't a pass and fail. In a recent consultation that went out for a second wave of changes that we've got coming later on next year, we talk about the word satisfactory for the instructor. That isn't coming in this change on the 1st of October. But what is important here is that this is a training flight and it's not a pass and a fail. Guidance there in the GM goes into quite a lot of detail, and a lot of that was already published in a training com, which was published a couple of years ago, back in about 2021, 2020. And so what we took a lot of that information that was in the training com, and we brought it into AMC kind of language to try and structure it more the way that the AMCs work. And the GM works. We also added into there the additional bits around partial power loss and VFR Moving Map devices, and any information that, you know, for other areas that we'd got. AMC2 talks about the refresher training flight normally should be conducted in a single flight of about 1 hour, of at least 1 hour, I should say, sorry. We believe that this is important because this gives the opportunity for the instructor to deliver the training that's necessary and for the pilot to learn something from there. Now, there is a caveat to that. We've all been there with the weather and other limitations that we see, but that's the ideal that we're trying to aim at here. One new bit that we've added into here is there's an AMC there which talks about the hold of an IMC rating, and of course one of the things we are also doing, which I think Ed will touch on a bit later, is we are renaming the IRR, the instrument rating restrictor. We're bringing it back to the IMC rating. So if someone's got an IMC rating or an IR, they will get some credit towards meeting that dual refresher flight, having a valid IMC or IR rating on single engine airplanes or multi-engine airplanes. And so there's an AMC there which explains how that's to be structured, so that the credit that they get towards that dual refresher flight. So that's an additional thing that's gone in to try and explain where we've got individuals that have done a prof check for a class rating who can get a credit towards the dual refresher flight, but there was some ambiguity around instrument ratings. So we've tried to address that. Is that your one? Yeah. That's one. I hand back to Ed. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Justin. So I will just touch on a few additional changes in the aeroplane category that you should be aware of. A bit miscellaneous. So you may recall in Cap 804 there's quite a lot of guidance material around differences training. We've now copied this across to the GM to FCL 710, which is essentially the requirements for class type ratings and variants. So in GM2, you'll see that all laid out there. And even though it's technically not a requirement under 710, we have added some GM for certain other kind of features, shall we say, like electric trim and autopilots, because I think it's useful to have a bit of training in those features, even as very basic ones. We've had a few incidents and accidents recently involving electric trim runaways or autopilots that were unintentionally engaged, for example. GM3 for EFIS displays, again, takes the legacy Cap 804 content that went into quite a lot of detail about what you should do for EFIS differences training and just puts it in its proper place under FCL 710. So if you're an instructor delivering any of the differences training is required under the type rating and endorsement list, go and have a look at the GM to FCL 710 if you want some guidance on what subjects to cover. Another thing you'll notice is that sailplane towing rating is coming out of the UK Aircrew Regulation and also out of the Sailplane Regulation. So this was something that came in originally with EASA. We didn't historically have a sailplane towing rating in this country, or at least not a statutory one. And we're essentially going back to that arrangement whereby, in practice, the safety of glider towing operations in this country will be managed by the BGA. So if you have the towing rating on your license at the moment, and if at some point that license is reissued, you'll see that rating drop off. So don't be alarmed, you haven't lost any privileges. Something that Justin mentioned a moment ago, we are now retiring the term instrument rating restricted. So this was something that came in when we went over to Part FCL in 2012, and it was a way to distinguish between the rating that had been historically issued under the Air Navigation Order and a rating that now had to be issued under Article 4 of the Cover Regulation of Aircrew, such that it was valid for Part FCL licenses. We feel that legally we don't need this distinction anymore. If you have a Part FCL license with an IMC rating, it is still technically issued under Article 4 of the Aircrew Regulation, but we've just renamed it IMC rating in said article. So again, if you hold a Part FCL license is reissued for some reason, it will reappear as IMC as it would have done back in the day. We are keeping the aerobatic rating though. Again, this was something that came in with Part FCL originally in 2012. I know it was derogated for some time in this country, but it has now fully come into force for Part FCL license holders in the aeroplane category. And from the 1st of October, new license holders issued with a license for the first time after the 1st of October will now need an aerobatic rating for both Part 21 and non-Part 21 aircraft. We had a look at the safety data around the aerobatic rating, and it was a bit marginal, to be honest, but we think there is some safety benefit there of having a formal rating as opposed to the informal training that existed prior to EASA. So if you're getting a new, this will mostly apply, I think, to NPPL A holders. So if new NPPL A holders issued after the 1st of October, when they want to go and fly, go off and fly aerobatics, they now need to do the rating, and that rating will be issued under the ANO for NPPL holders based on the same course as per the Part FCL. So if you want to have a look at the AMC to, I think it's FCL 800, the aerobatic rating, follow the same course for the NPPL, and there'll be a note in the NPPL policies and procedures cap as well to that effect. We are, however, removing the prerequisite experience to take the aerobatic rating. So currently in Aircrew, it says you have to have 30 hours PIC post-license issue under Part FCL, and we just thought this was rather pointless. You know, we want to encourage new pilots to continue training, get more qualifications as soon as they want to. We don't think it really serves any safety purpose. If someone can go straight onto an aerobatic course and meet the minimum standard, the inadequate standard, that's absolutely fine. No need to go off and get 30 hours beforehand. Pretty much the final thing I'll talk about on the well, this applies to most, this applies to all the aircraft categories, but comes up probably more often than not in the aeroplane category, is the use of non-Part 21 aircraft in the context of Part FCL licenses and ratings. And it does sometimes cause a bit of confusion, this subject, but we're hoping that some of the changes we've made from the 1st of October will clear some of that up and make it a bit easier to conduct reasonable activity with non-Part 21 aircraft where applicable. So you may be aware that ORA ATO 135 for ATOs and the same essentially for DTOs, Gen 240, essentially requires an ATO or DTO to have a CA authorization before using a non-Part 21 aircraft under their organisation towards Part FCL training. So when we talk about non-Part 21 aircraft, we mean aircraft that prior to EU exit would have been non-EASA aircraft. It's sometimes said that equals permit aircraft. That's not necessarily the case. There are some non-part dependent aircraft that still fly on a certificate of airworthiness issued under the ANO. There aren't many, but the way Annex 1 is written essentially refers to things that are of a very old design, ex-military or amateur built. So obviously if it's an amateur built aircraft, it will be on a permit, but the older ex-military or very old C of A aircraft may still be on a C of A. That requirement for an authorization under ORA or Part DTO is being removed. So CA will no longer be required to authorize the use of non-part on aircraft, but the organisation must do their own assessment of suitability. And you'll see if you click the link to those two regulations in the first bullet point and look at the AMC GM drop down, you'll see some guidance there about how to assess aircraft in that regard. It's essentially suitability for training. Does it have a POH? Does it have any abnormal handling characteristics? Do you have instructors who are competent to act as PIC on the aircraft, etc., etc.? All fairly sensible stuff. Now, permit aircraft that are on a national permit to fly are still restricted by the ANO and the associated permissions issued under the ANO in terms of what operations on a commercial basis, including flight training, may be conducted. But for example, normally if you've got a permit aircraft, a national permit to fly aircraft, where it is the owner or joint owner wishing to partake in training under PIFCL in their own aircraft, that is normally a non-commercial operation, so long as they retain essentially the management of the aircraft, responsibility for the maintenance, etc., and are only using the services of the ATO or DTO insofar as they're providing instruction in that aircraft. So they no longer need an authorization under DTO or ORA ATO to do so. They can go to an ATO or DTO. Obviously, the organisation is under no obligation to train in their aircraft, but if they agree to, they cooperate with the owner and consider the aircraft suitable, then they can do, whether it might be a typical example might be the aerobatic rating, for example, the owner of a permit aircraft. Now, obviously, they don't necessarily need an aerobatic rating if they have an old A&O license issued prior to the 1st of October, but maybe they want an aerobatic rating on their Part FCL license. Maybe they've just bought the aircraft, for example, or maybe they've just bought the aircraft and they need to do their tail wheel differences training, for example. It's probably going to be a fairly rare event, but it is possible under this arrangement, for example, for someone to have bought or built their own permit aircraft and then find an ATO who's willing to teach them to fly in it. However, I did mention that for non-owners, the ANO, specifically Article 42 of the ANO, still does restrict permit aircraft to, in terms of whether an ATO or DTO can offer that training on a commercial basis, i.e. to a member of the public who's just walked in off the street. That is essentially governed, or the scope of that is set by a permission, a general permission issued under Article 42. It's currently RS 1585, and that will be reissued and updated in the coming weeks. And that essentially sets out the circumstances for pilots who already hold a license in the same aircraft category may, in certain circumstances, receive training on a commercial basis from an ATO or DTO. An example we were discussing earlier today was an ex-military helicopter, for example, where they want to sell type ratings, and that would be, for example, permitted under 1585. What's not permitted, for example, is an ATO or DTO buying a permit aircraft and offering ab initio training towards the PPL for people, for punters who are just coming in off the street, as it were. This is sometimes causes a bit of confusion, this subject, so have a careful read of 1585, and if you're under any doubt, then we can always answer any questions in that regard. Just email the GA inbox. So that's about it for the substantive content, particularly on the aeroplanes and helicopters. I'll just briefly mention sailplanes and balloons. The theme of today is very much fixed and rotary wings, but as I mentioned at the start, a big element of this project has also been to review the balloon and sailplane regulations for the UK. So these are the regulations that were inherited from the ARSA system at the point of EU exit, and we had a bit of a choice to make as to whether to keep them, throw them out, or adapt them. And that's the latter option is what we went with. So the balloon regulation, as came in with the ARSA in 2019, lives on in UK law, albeit substantially adapted for the UK market. And it's a similar sort of story with the sailplane regulation. That's coming into full effect as well on the 1st of October this year. And a few enhancements for the UK market have been included. For example, the introduction of the BGA qualification, the basic instructor rating is now going in, so that it has a statutory basis in the regulation. In terms of next steps, further detail and comms will be highlighted via Skywise as always. Apologies for the number of emails that we sometimes send out via Skywise, but do look out for ones relating to this subject. More detail is available at Licensing and Training Simplification on the GA landing page. And if you want to have a look through the regulations, obviously all the links in this presentation will be available once we make the presentation available, but they all link you, they take you to the relevant entries in the Aviation Regulatory Library, and that is normally the best place to navigate, certainly the assimilated law. If you're looking in the Air Navigation Order, the Air Navigation Order 2016 is still the current one. That's on legislation.gov. It has not, the last time we checked, actually been updated for the 1st of October changes, but we hope it will be in the coming weeks. But that's something that's outside of our control. That's the central parliamentary unit that does those updates. At that point, I will make a very quick punt for the Skyway Code and also the safety sense leaflets. We promote them as one of our kind of main channels, safety promotion for GA. I hope all the instructors, examiners out there and training organisations find them useful. We have issued a few new SSLs recently, most notably the Pilot Health one, and we're planning a new version of the Skyway Code early next year. But aside from that, we will take questions now. We can also take written questions via the GA inbox, and for all things GA, for ca.co.uk/GA.
Thanks, Ed. We haven't had any more questions through on the chat, but what I will do, since we've got some time, is if anybody wants to ask a question, you can raise your hand and I will unmute you in turn if you've got any questions you'd rather ask verbally. We'll wait a few minutes and see if anyone's got any questions. But as Ed said, you can always email our inbox, ga@caa.co.uk. Pete Stratton has a question. Let me just allow the mic. Go ahead, Pete. You should be able to unmute yourself. I can't hear you at the moment, Pete. I have allowed your mic, so you might just need to unmute yourself on your Teams. Okay, it's not working at the moment. So what I'm going to do is I'm just going to move to someone else at the moment, and we'll come back to Pete in a second. Will someone else's hand go up? Let me come to you. The only name I've got here is Head of Training Unverified. So I'll allow the mic, and if you want to speak, then go ahead.
It's Eva at the Pilot Centre. I understand that LAPL only flying instructors will now become NPPL only flying instructors. I was hoping that there would be a move to enable those that used to be LAPL only flying instructors to teach for PPL. Slightly off topic, perhaps.
Yes, so they indeed. So I mean, they already are NPP. They are already effectively LAPL only or /NPPL A only instructors. So and that will continue. They'll be able to teach the NPPL A. In terms of allowing them to teach the PPL, obviously the issue we have is that Annex 1, ICAO Annex 1 says that they need commercial knowledge, which we can't really kind of get round or alleviate from that requirement. What we would like to do at some point at a future occasion is potentially come up with a way of meeting that ICAO requirement in a more proportionate manner than, for example, the current CPL knowledge is.
Thank you.
Thank you. Pete Stratton has put his question in the chat, which says, in the absence of an ANO change, will an SI be published?
So the amending order for the ANO has gone through. It is in place. It went through at the same time as the SI for the simulated regulations. The ANO, the amending order is dealt with by legislation.gov, and they just haven't got round to updating it. If you want to view the amending order, it's a little bit convoluted to read and digest, Pete. But if you search for Air Navigation Order, I think it brackets Amendment 2025, that should take you to the amending order, and you can read through it.
Thank you. Are there any other questions? As I said, do feel free to raise your hand and I can unmute you. I'm going to take that as no more questions, but do feel free to get in touch with us via email. And as I said, this session has been recorded, and we will aim to share that probably early next week now. Hopefully this has been a helpful roundup of the changes for you from Ed and Justin. Great.
Thanks, Billy.
Thank you very much. I'll end
Thanks,
the event
everyone.
now. Thanks. Bye.